In the glittering halls of Valdoria Palace, where ancient traditions clash with modern hearts, a single tiara holds the power to destroy a kingdom. When family loyalty becomes a weapon and royal bloodlines turn into battlefields, Crown Prince Alexander must choose between the woman he loves and the crown that defines him. But some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and some betrayals too deep to forgive. What happens when the very foundations of a 1,000-year monarchy crumble in a single, explosive moment? The answer lies in a story of forbidden love, family betrayal, and a tiara that was never meant to be worn by mortal hands. Welcome to the kingdom of Valdoria, where every smile hides a dagger, every bow conceals a threat, and where the price of wearing the crown might just be everything you hold dear. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as Lady Isabella Thornton hurried through the east wing corridors, her silk gown rustling against the ancient stone walls. She clutched a small velvet box to her chest, her heart pounding with each step. Today would change everything. Crown Prince Alexander stood at the window of his private study, watching the palace gardens come alive with the dawn. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his military uniform pressed to perfection, but his eyes held a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. At 28, he carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, and, lately, that weight had become unbearable. "Your Highness," came a soft voice from behind him. Isabella's reflection appeared in the window glass, and Alexander's stern expression softened immediately. "Bella," he whispered, turning to face the woman who had captured his heart 3 years ago. She was the daughter of a minor duke, beautiful and intelligent, but not the political alliance his mother, Queen Margaret, had planned for him. Isabella approached slowly, her green eyes filled with a mixture of love and fear. "I need to tell you something, Alexander. Something that changes everything." Before he could respond, the heavy doors to his study burst open. Queen Margaret swept into the room like a winter storm, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her blue eyes blazing with fury. Behind her followed Lady Vivian Blackwood, the woman chosen to be Alexander's bride, and her mother, the formidable Duchess of Ravencrest. "Alexander," the Queen's voice cut through the air like ice. "We need to discuss your future." Immediately, Lady Vivian stepped forward, her blonde hair catching the morning light. She was undeniably beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and calculating gray eyes. Everything about her screamed noble breeding and political advantage. She had been groomed since childhood to be a queen, and she knew it. "Your Majesty," Isabella said, attempting a curtsy, but Queen Margaret's cold stare stopped her mid-motion. "Lady Isabella, how convenient that you're here. It saves me the trouble of summoning you." The Queen's words dripped with barely concealed contempt. "I believe it's time you understood your place in this kingdom." Alexander stepped protectively in front of Isabella. "Mother, whatever you have to say, you can say it to both of us." "Can I?" Queen Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Very well. Lady Vivian, show them." The Duchess of Ravencrest produced a thick folder from her expensive handbag and placed it on Alexander's desk. "These are the financial records of your father's estate, Lady Isabella. Quite interesting reading, I assure you." Isabella's face went pale as she stared at the documents. Her father, Duke Thornton, had been struggling financially for years, but she had no idea how bad things had become. "Your family owes the crown nearly 2 million Valders," Queen Margaret continued, her voice growing colder with each word. "Your father borrowed against his lands, his title, everything. He's been living on borrowed time and borrowed money." "That's impossible," Isabella whispered. But even as she said it, she remembered her father's worried faces during their last conversation, his evasive answers about their financial situation. Lady Vivian smiled cruelly. "Oh, but it gets better. The debt is due in full by the end of this month. Unless, of course, certain arrangements can be made." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. "What kind of arrangements?" "Simple," Queen Margaret said, moving to stand behind Vivian like a protective mother hen. "Lady Isabella removes herself from court life permanently. She marries Lord Garrett Ashford and moves to his estates in the northern provinces. In return, her father's debts are forgiven." "Lord Ashford," Isabella gasped. "But he's 60 years old and has buried 3 wives already. He's also extremely wealthy and desperately wants a young, beautiful wife to warm his bed," the Duchess added with a nasty smile. "He's been very generous with his offer to pay your father's debts." Alexander's face flushed red with anger. You can't be serious. Isabella is not some commodity to be traded for debts. Can't I? Queen Margaret's voice rose dangerously. I am the Queen of Valdoria, Alexander. I decide who marries whom, especially when it concerns the future king. And your future lies with Lady Vivian, not with some bankrupt duke's daughter. Isabella clutched the velvet box tighter to her chest. Inside was a pregnancy test, positive. She had discovered it just that morning, and the news had filled her with both joy and terror. Now, facing this impossible situation, she felt the weight of the secret crushing her. There's something else you should know, Lady Vivian said, her gray eyes glittering with malice. Lord Ashford has very specific requirements for his bride. She must be pure, untouched. Any woman who has given herself to another man would find herself in a very difficult position indeed. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Alexander understood immediately. If Isabella refused to marry Lord Ashford, not only would her father be ruined, but her reputation would be destroyed. In the conservative kingdom of Valdoria, a woman's honor was everything. You're despicable, Alexander snarled, taking a step toward Lady Vivian, but his mother raised her hand to stop him. I'm practical, Queen Margaret corrected. This kingdom needs strong alliances, Alexander. The Blackwood family controls the largest shipping empire in the eastern seas. Their wealth could fund our military for decades. Lady Isabella's family offers nothing but debt and scandal. I love her, Alexander said simply, and the words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. Queen Margaret's expression softened for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of the mother beneath the monarch. Love is a luxury kings cannot afford, my son. Your grandfather learned that lesson the hard way. She was referring to the old king's affair with a commoner, which had nearly torn the kingdom apart 40 years ago. The scandal had weakened the monarchy's position and led to years of political instability. Isabella felt tears burning in her eyes, but she forced herself to remain strong. What if I refuse? Then your father will be arrested for fraud and treason, the Duchess said matter-of-factly. Borrowing money from the crown under false pretenses is a serious crime. He could face 20 years in prison. Alexander's jaw tightened. This is blackmail. This is reality, Queen Margaret replied. In 3 days, we will hold the autumn feast. At that feast, you will publicly announce your engagement to Lady Vivian. The starlight tiara will be presented to her as a symbol of her new position as your future queen. The starlight tiara was one of the crown jewels, worn only by queens and queen-to-be. It was said to be blessed by ancient magic, bringing prosperity and happiness to whoever wore it. More importantly, it was a public symbol of royal acceptance. And if I refuse? Alexander challenged. Then you forfeit your right to the throne, Queen Margaret said quietly. Your younger brother Marcus would make an excellent king. He's already shown great interest in Lady Catherine Westfield, a much more suitable match. Alexander's blood ran cold. Marcus was only 24, ambitious, and easily influenced. He would be a puppet king, controlled by their mother and the noble families that supported her. Isabella stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow evening, Queen Margaret declared. The engagement announcement will be made whether you've decided or not. I suggest you choose wisely. The Queen swept from the room, followed by Lady Vivian and her mother. As the doors closed behind them, Alexander and Isabella stood in the sudden silence, both feeling as though their world had just collapsed around them. Bella, Alexander said softly, reaching for her, but she stepped back. Don't, she whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Don't make this harder than it already is. I won't let them do this to you. To us. Isabella looked down at the velvet box in her hands. Inside was proof of their love, and possibly the one thing that could change everything. But using it would destroy Alexander's reputation and potentially destabilize the kingdom. Could she be that selfish? There's something I need to tell you, she began, her voice shaking. Before she could continue, the doors opened again. This time it was Marcus, Alexander's younger brother. His sandy hair was disheveled, and his usually cheerful expression was replaced by one of grim determination. Alexander, we need to talk, Marcus said urgently. I just overheard something that changes everything. Not now, Marcus, Alexander said tiredly. No, you need to hear this, Marcus insisted. It's about the starlight tiara. Mother isn't telling you the whole truth. Alexander and Isabella both turned to stare at him. Marcus closed the door behind him and walked closer, lowering his voice. I was in the vault yesterday with the royal jeweler. The starlight tiara isn't just a symbol, Alexander. According to the ancient laws of succession, whoever wears it at their engagement ceremony has an unbreakable claim to the throne. If Lady Vivian wears it, even if you change your mind later, she could legally challenge any other marriage you make. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. What are you saying? I'm saying that this isn't just about marriage, Marcus explained. This is about permanent control of the kingdom. Once Vivian wears that tiara, she becomes legally untouchable. Even if Alexander falls out of love with her, even if they divorce, she would retain the right to rule as queen regent if anything happened to him. Alexander sank into his chair, the full magnitude of the trap becoming clear. So Mother isn't just arranging a marriage. She's arranging a coup. The Blackwood family has been planning this for years, Marcus continued. They've been slowly buying up debts and gaining influence over the noble families. If Vivian becomes queen, they'll effectively control the kingdom through her. Isabella clutched the velvet box tighter. The secret she carried seemed even more important now, but also more dangerous. If Queen Margaret was willing to go this far to control the throne, what would she do to eliminate any threats to her plan? There has to be another way, Alexander said, standing and beginning to pace. Some legal loophole, some ancient law that could help us. Marcus shook his head. I've been researching all night. The only way to prevent this is to ensure that someone else wears the tiara first. According to the law, if another woman of noble birth wears it in a royal ceremony before Lady Vivian, it nullifies her claim. But who? Isabella asked, though her heart was already racing with a terrifying possibility. Alexander and Marcus both looked at her, understanding passing between them like lightning. No, Isabella whispered. Absolutely not. I won't be used as a pawn in your family's games. It's not using you, Alexander said urgently. It's saving the kingdom. And saving us. Is it? Isabella's voice rose with emotion. Or is it just another form of manipulation? How do I know that once you have what you want, you won't discard me just like your mother wants to? Alexander crossed the room and took her hands in his. Because I love you, Bella. Because I would rather give up the crown than lose you. Then, give it up, she challenged. Walk away. We could leave Valdoria tonight and never look back. For a moment, Alexander wavered. The idea of escaping with Isabella was incredibly tempting. They could find a small country estate somewhere, live quietly, raise a family away from the poisonous politics of court. But Marcus grabbed his arm. Alexander, you can't. If you abdicate, I become king. And I'm not strong enough to resist Mother's influence. The kingdom needs you. Isabella pulled her hands free from Alexander's grasp. And what about what I need? What about my choice in all of this? The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Outside the window, the palace bells began to chime 9 o'clock, marking another hour closer to the impossible decision that would shape all their futures. Isabella looked down at the velvet box in her hands one more time. Inside was a secret that could change everything. But at what cost? She thought of her father, facing possible imprisonment. She thought of Alexander, trapped between duty and love. She thought of the kingdom, potentially falling under the control of people who saw it only as a source of wealth and power. And she thought of the tiny life growing inside her, innocent and deserving of a world better than this one. I need time, she said finally. I need to think. Alexander nodded, though his eyes were filled with pain. Whatever you decide, Bella, I'll support you. But, please, don't take too long. Tomorrow evening, everything changes. As Isabella left the study, her mind was already racing with possibilities. She had less than 36 hours to make a decision that would affect not just her own life, but the entire kingdom. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a desperate plan was beginning to form. The morning sun had given way to gray clouds, and the first drops of rain began to fall against the palace windows. It seemed even the weather knew that storms were coming to the kingdom of Valdoria. The afternoon rain pelted against the windows of Isabella's chambers as she sat at her writing desk, staring at a blank piece of parchment. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the quill, knowing that whatever words she wrote next could seal her fate forever. The velvet box sat open beside her, the positive pregnancy test a constant reminder of the life-changing secret she carried. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, quickly closing the box and sliding it into her desk drawer. Lady Catherine Westfield entered, her auburn hair damp from the rain, and her usual bright smile replaced by concern. Catherine was Isabella's closest friend at court, the daughter of Earl Westfield and, according to palace gossip, Prince Marcus's secret romantic interest. Bella, you look terrible, Catherine said bluntly, settling into the chair across from her friend. I heard about this morning. The whole palace is buzzing with rumors. Isabella laughed bitterly. I'm sure they are. Nothing the court loves more than a scandal brewing. Catherine leaned forward, her brown eyes serious. Is it true? About your father's debts? Every word, Isabella confirmed, her voice hollow. I had no idea how bad things were. Father always seemed so confident, so in control. And the marriage proposal from Lord Ashford? Isabella shuddered. Also true. Queen Margaret made it very clear that refusing isn't really an option. Catherine was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then, she reached across the desk and took Isabella's hand. There has to be another way. This is the 21st century, Bella. Women don't have to be traded like cattle anymore. Don't they? Isabella asked sadly. Look around you, Cat. This palace might have modern plumbing and electric lights, but the politics are still medieval. Power, bloodlines, strategic marriages, nothing has really changed. Marcus told me about the starlight tiara, Catherine said quietly. About what it really means if Lady Vivian wears it. Isabella's head snapped up. He told you? Catherine, that information could be dangerous. Which is exactly why I'm here, Catherine replied firmly. Marcus and I have been talking, and we think we've found a solution. Before Isabella could ask what she meant, another knock came at the door. This time it was Prince Marcus himself, looking nervous but determined. He glanced around the room quickly before closing the door behind him. Good, you're both here, he said, walking to the window and checking to make sure no one was listening outside. We don't have much time. Marcus, what's going on? Isabella asked, standing from her desk. I've been doing more research into the succession laws, he explained, pulling a thick book from under his coat. And I found something interesting. The law about the starlight tiara doesn't just apply to engagement ceremonies. It applies to any royal ceremony where the tiara is worn. Catherine's eyes widened. What are you suggesting? Marcus opened the book to a marked page. There's an old tradition called the ceremony of royal protection. It was used centuries ago to grant noble ladies the protection of the crown in times of danger. The ceremony involves the lady wearing the starlight tiara and pledging loyalty to the kingdom. I've never heard of this ceremony, Isabella said suspiciously. Because it hasn't been used in over 200 years, Marcus admitted. But it's still legally binding. If you participated in this ceremony before Lady Vivian's engagement, you would have the same legal claim to royal protection that she would gain through marriage. Isabella felt her heart racing. What exactly are you proposing? Catherine stood up and walked to her friend's side. We're proposing that you take control of your own destiny, Bella. Instead of being forced into marriage with that horrible old man, you claim royal protection and stay at court. But I still wouldn't be able to marry Alexander, Isabella pointed out. Queen Margaret would never allow it. Marcus's expression grew serious. Actually, there's more. If you wear the tiara in the ceremony of royal protection, and if Alexander publicly acknowledges you as being under royal protection, it creates a legal bond. Not marriage, exactly, but something close to it. It would prevent anyone from forcing you into another marriage without your consent. Isabella's mind reeled. You're talking about circumventing the queen's authority. I'm talking about using ancient laws that even Mother can't ignore, Marcus corrected. These traditions are older than her reign, older than our entire dynasty. She would have to respect them. Would she? Isabella asked doubtfully. Or would she find some way to have me arrested for treason? Catherine squeezed her friend's hand. That's why we need to do this publicly, with witnesses. If the ceremony is performed in front of the entire court, Queen Margaret couldn't reverse it without looking tyrannical. Isabella walked to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. In the distance, she could see servants preparing the grand ballroom for tomorrow night's feast. The feast where Alexander was supposed to announce his engagement to Lady Vivian. There's something else, she said quietly, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. Something that complicates everything. Marcus and Catherine exchanged glances. What is it? Catherine asked gently. Isabella turned back to them, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine's mouth dropped open, while Marcus ran a hand through his hair, clearly understanding the magnitude of this revelation. How far along? Catherine whispered. Not far. I just found out this morning, Isabella explained. But if Queen Margaret discovers this before I'm legally protected, she'll have you banished in disgrace, Marcus finished grimly. Or worse. Catherine stood up abruptly and began pacing. Actually, this changes everything. Bella, you're carrying the future heir to the throne. That gives you more power than any ceremony could. Does it? Isabella asked. Or does it just make me more of a target? Before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway made them all freeze. Marcus quickly hid the law book behind a chair cushion while Catherine grabbed a random book from Isabella's shelf and pretended to be reading. Lady Vivian Blackwood swept into the room without knocking, followed by two of her ladies-in-waiting. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the rain, and she wore a gown of deep purple silk that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. Lady Isabella, Vivian said with false sweetness. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Lady Vivian, Isabella replied coolly. What brings you to my chambers? Vivian smiled, but her gray eyes remained cold. I wanted to discuss tomorrow evening's festivities. I thought it might be nice if you played a special role in the ceremony. What kind of role? Marcus asked suspiciously. Oh, nothing too demanding, Vivian replied, her tone becoming more obviously mocking. Perhaps Lady Isabella could serve as my personal attendant during the tiara ceremony. It would be so fitting, don't you think? The woman who almost was, serving the woman who will be. Catherine stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. That's incredibly inappropriate, Lady Vivian. Is it? Vivian's smile widened. I think it's quite generous, actually. It would allow Lady Isabella to remain at court for the ceremony before she departs for her new life in the northern provinces. The threat was clear. Vivian knew about the proposed marriage to Lord Ashford and was making sure Isabella understood that her fate was sealed. Isabella forced herself to remain calm. That's very thoughtful of you, Lady Vivian, but I'm afraid I may not be available tomorrow evening. Oh, Vivian's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. And why would that be? Because, Isabella said, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed, I'm considering participating in an ancient ceremony of my own. Vivian's expression shifted slightly, uncertainty replacing her confidence. What kind of ceremony? Marcus stepped forward. The ceremony of royal protection. It's an old tradition that grants ladies of noble birth the protection of the crown. I've never heard of such a ceremony, Vivian said dismissively, but Isabella could see the worry in her eyes. Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, Catherine added sweetly. Some of us take the time to study our kingdom's history. Vivian's face flushed red with anger. Queen Margaret would never allow such a thing. Actually, Isabella said, surprising herself with her boldness, Queen Margaret has no choice in the matter. Ancient laws supersede modern preferences. For a moment, the two women stared at each other in silence, the air thick with tension. Then, Vivian's expression shifted to something almost predatory. How interesting, she said slowly. And, tell me, Lady Isabella, what exactly would this ceremony protect you from? From being forced into unwanted marriages, for one thing, Isabella replied steadily. Vivian laughed, but there was no humor in it. How convenient. And I suppose Prince Alexander would be involved in this ceremony? The crown prince would need to acknowledge the protection. Yes, Marcus said carefully. I see. Vivian's smile became razor-sharp. Well, this should make tomorrow evening even more entertaining than I anticipated. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. Oh, Lady Isabella, one more thing. Lord Ashford sent word that he's moved up his timeline. He'll be arriving at the palace tomorrow afternoon to finalize the marriage arrangements. I do hope your mysterious ceremony doesn't interfere with your prior commitments. With that parting shot, Vivian swept from the room, her ladies-in-waiting trailing behind her like obedient puppies. As soon as they were gone, Catherine exploded. That horrible, manipulative witch. She's trying to force your hand. It's working, Isabella said weakly, sinking back into her chair. If Lord Ashford arrives tomorrow, everything becomes more complicated. Marcus began pacing, his mind clearly racing. Actually, it might work in our favor. If we perform the ceremony before he arrives, you'll be legally protected from his proposal. But what about the pregnancy? Catherine asked quietly. Vivian is suspicious. I could see it in her eyes. Isabella touched her stomach again, feeling the weight of the secret growing heavier by the moment. How long before I start showing? A few weeks, maybe a month, Catherine estimated. But court gossips are sharp-eyed. Any change in your behavior, your appetite, your appearance, they'll notice. Then, we need to move quickly, Marcus decided. I'll speak to the palace chaplain tonight about performing the ceremony. We can do it tomorrow afternoon, before the feast. Wait, Isabella said, holding up her hand. I haven't agreed to this yet. You're asking me to essentially declare war on Queen Margaret. We're asking you to save yourself, Catherine corrected gently. And possibly save Alexander too. What about my father? If I defy Queen Margaret, she could still have him arrested. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, his expression grew determined. Leave that to me. I have some influence with the royal treasury. I might be able to arrange for your father's debts to be forgiven through other means. You would do that? Isabella asked, surprised. For my brother's happiness? For the good of the kingdom? Yes, I would. Isabella looked between Marcus and Catherine, seeing the hope and determination in their faces. These people were willing to risk everything to help her, to give her a chance at controlling her own destiny. But was she brave enough to take that chance? Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the old and making room for the new. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. The only question was whether Isabella would be the author of that change, or simply its victim. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about Alexander's kind eyes and gentle hands, about the possibility of a life where she could make her own choices. Then, she thought about Lord Ashford's wrinkled face and cruel reputation, about Queen Margaret's cold ambition, about a future spent as a political pawn in other people's games. All right, she said finally, her voice stronger than she felt. Let's do it. Let's perform the ceremony. Catherine hugged her tightly, while Marcus grinned with relief. But, even as they began planning the details, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to step into a storm far more dangerous than the rain outside her windows. In another part of the palace, Lady Vivian was having her own urgent conversation with her mother. The ceremony of royal protection was indeed real, and if Isabella managed to invoke it, their carefully laid plans could be ruined. We need to move faster, the Duchess of Ravencrest said, her face grim. If that little nobody gains royal protection, she becomes untouchable. Then, we make sure the ceremony never happens, Vivian replied coldly. One way or another. As night fell over the kingdom of Valdoria, two sides prepared for a battle that would determine not just who wore the crown, but what kind of kingdom Valdoria would become. And at the center of it all, a young woman with an impossible choice and a dangerous secret prepared to fight for her freedom and her future. Dawn broke gray and cold over Valdoria Palace, matching the somber mood that had settled over Isabella's chambers. She had barely slept, spending the night rehearsing what she would say during the ceremony of royal protection. Now, as her maid helped her into a simple but elegant blue gown, Isabella felt the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. "Miss, you're trembling," her maid, Elena, observed with concern. Elena had served Isabella for 3 years and had become more friend than servant. "I'm just nervous about today," Isabella replied, which was certainly true, though it barely scratched the surface of her emotions. Elena paused in her work of braiding Isabella's dark hair. "Miss, if I may say so, the whole palace is talking about strange happenings. Servants have been whispering about ancient ceremonies and legal documents. Is there anything I can do to help?" Isabella looked at Elena's reflection in the mirror. The young woman was loyal and discreet, qualities that were rare in the gossip-filled environment of the palace. "Actually, there is something. I need you to watch for any unusual activity today. People who don't belong in certain areas, conversations that seem secretive. Can you do that?" Elena nodded seriously. "Of course, Mississippi. I'll keep my ears open." A knock at the door interrupted them. Prince Marcus entered, looking tired but determined. He carried a leather satchel under his arm, and his face was grave. "Bella, we have a problem," he said without preamble. Isabella's heart sank. "What kind of problem?" "I spoke with Chaplain Benedict last night about the ceremony. He's willing to perform it. But we need 3 witnesses of noble birth and a formal petition to the crown." "That doesn't sound insurmountable," Isabella said carefully. "It's not. But this morning I discovered that Lady Vivian has been busy too. She's convinced several members of the royal council that your ceremony is actually an attempt to usurp royal authority." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "Usurp authority? That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Marcus asked, settling into a chair. "Think about it from their perspective. A commoner's daughter suddenly, invoking ancient laws to gain royal protection? It does look suspicious." Elena finished Isabella's hair and quietly excused herself, sensing the conversation was becoming too sensitive for her presence. "What are you saying?" Isabella asked once they were alone. "I'm saying that we need to be very careful about how we present this. If the royal council views the ceremony as treasonous, they could have you arrested before it even begins." Isabella sank onto her bed, feeling overwhelmed. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should just accept my fate and marry Lord Ashford. "No," Marcus said firmly, rising from his chair. I won't let that happen. But we need to change our approach. How? Before Marcus could answer, Catherine burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and fear. Bella, you need to hear this. I was just in the servants' quarters helping prepare for tonight's feast, and I overheard something terrible. What now? Isabella asked wearily. Catherine closed the door and leaned against it. Lady Vivian's mother, the Duchess, was talking to someone, I couldn't see who, about ensuring that you don't make it to any ceremony today. Marcus jumped to his feet. What exactly did she say? She said, and I quote, "The Thornton girl won't be a problem much longer. By tomorrow, she'll be on a ship to the northern provinces, willing or not." Isabella felt ice-cold fear wash over her. They're planning to kidnap me? It sounds like it, Catherine confirmed. Bella, I think they're going to try to take you before the ceremony can happen. Marcus began pacing, his mind clearly racing. We need to move the timeline up. Way up. To when? Isabella asked. Now? This morning. Before they have a chance to act. But, you said we needed formal petitions and witnesses. Forget the petitions, Marcus interrupted. We'll invoke emergency protocols. If your life is in danger, the Crown has the authority to grant immediate protection. Catherine looked confused. Emergency protocols? It's an old law designed to protect noble ladies from forced marriages or abduction, Marcus explained. If a lady can prove she's in immediate danger, the Crown can grant protection on the spot. But I'd still need to prove the danger is real, Isabella pointed out. You just did, Marcus said grimly. Catherine witnessed the Duchess making threats against you. That's enough evidence to invoke emergency protection. Isabella felt a glimmer of hope, quickly followed by renewed fear. What about Alexander? Where's he in all this? Marcus's expression darkened. That's another problem. Mother has kept him busy all morning with meetings about trade agreements and military funding. I think she suspects something. So he doesn't know what we're planning? I tried to reach him, but his schedule is completely booked until this afternoon. We might have to proceed without him. Isabella's heart sank. She had imagined Alexander being there to support her through the ceremony, to publicly acknowledge her protection. Without him, the whole thing seemed much more frightening. There's something else, Catherine said quietly. I also heard talk about Lord Ashford arriving earlier than expected. His carriage was spotted on the main road this morning. How much earlier? Marcus asked. He could be here within the hour. The three friends looked at each other, understanding that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. If Lord Ashford arrived before the ceremony, he would demand immediate access to Isabella as his promised bride. Once he made his claim public, it would be much harder to invoke royal protection. We have to move now, Marcus decided. Catherine, can you gather witnesses? We need at least 3 nobles who are willing to support Isabella. I can try, but most people are afraid of crossing Queen Margaret. What about Earl Westfield? Isabella suggested. Your father has always been kind to me. Catherine nodded. I'll ask him. And maybe Lord Pemberton. He's always been critical of arranged marriages. Good. Meet us in the chapel in 30 minutes, Marcus instructed. Bella, you need to prepare your statement. You'll have to explain why you're seeking protection and why it's urgent. As Catherine hurried out to find witnesses, Isabella felt panic beginning to set in. In 30 minutes, she would either be free to choose her own path, or she would be branded as a traitor to the Crown. The stakes couldn't be higher. Marcus, she said quietly, there's something else I need to tell you. Something that might change your willingness to help me. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. What is it? Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke the words, there would be no going back. I'm pregnant with Alexander's child. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through surprise, understanding, and, finally, determination. How long have you known? Since yesterday morning. Only Catherine knows, other than you now. Marcus sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. Bella, this changes everything. I know. If Queen Margaret finds out. No, you don't understand, Marcus interrupted. This doesn't make things more dangerous. It makes them safer. Isabella looked at him in confusion. How can you say that? Because you're carrying the heir to the throne, Marcus explained. Even Mother wouldn't dare harm the mother of Alexander's child, especially if that child could be the future king or queen. But I'm not married to Alexander. The child would be illegitimate. Not necessarily, Marcus said thoughtfully. There are provisions in our laws for recognizing royal children born out of wedlock, especially if the parents later marry. But, Lady Vivian's claim becomes meaningless if Alexander already has an heir on the way, Marcus finished. Bella, this pregnancy isn't just your salvation, It could save the entire kingdom. Isabella felt dizzy from the rapid shift in perspective. What she had seen as her greatest vulnerability might actually be her greatest strength. But we still need to get through the ceremony, she pointed out. And Lord Ashford will be here soon. Then we'd better hurry, Marcus said, standing and offering her his arm. Are you ready to change your life forever? Isabella thought about the child growing inside her, about Alexander's love, about the possibility of a future where she could make her own choices. Then she thought about Lord Ashford's cruel reputation and Queen Margaret's cold ambition. I'm ready, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. They made their way through the palace corridors, using servant passages to avoid the main hallways where they might be spotted. The chapel was located in the oldest part of the palace, a small stone building that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. When they arrived, they found Catherine waiting with her father, Earl Westfield, and Lord Pemberton. Both men looked nervous but determined. Standing with them was someone Isabella hadn't expected to see, Alexander. Alexander, she exclaimed, rushing to his side. How are you here? Marcus said you were in meetings all morning. Alexander smiled grimly. I was, until Catherine managed to slip me a note about what was happening. I told Mother I was feeling ill and needed to rest. She believed that. Probably not, but it bought me a few hours, Alexander replied. Marcus told me about the threats against you. I won't let anyone take you away, Bella. Chaplain Benedict emerged from the chapel's vestry, carrying an ancient leather-bound book. He was an elderly man with kind eyes who had served the royal family for over 30 years. Your Highness, he said to Marcus, I must tell you that this is highly irregular. I've never performed the ceremony of royal protection before. But you can do it? Marcus asked urgently. Yes, the ritual is described in detail in the old books. But I want to make sure that Lady Isabella understands what she's committing to. The chaplain turned to Isabella. My lady, this ceremony will place you under the permanent protection of the crown. You will become, essentially, a ward of the royal family. This means you cannot be forced into marriage against your will, but it also means your fate is tied to the royal family forever. Do you understand? Isabella nodded. I understand, Father. Then, let us begin quickly, the chaplain said, glancing nervously toward the chapel doors. I have a feeling we don't have much time. As they prepared to enter the chapel, the sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones echoed from the courtyard outside. Through the small window, they could see a luxurious carriage bearing the Ashford family crest pulling up to the palace steps. He's here, Catherine whispered. Then, we do this now, Alexander said firmly. Whatever happens next, at least Bella will be protected. But, as they watched through the window, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Queen Margaret herself was walking out to greet Lord Ashford, accompanied by Lady Vivian and a contingent of palace guards. She knows, Marcus said grimly. Somehow, she knows what we're planning. How is that possible? Earl Westfield asked. Before anyone could answer, they heard the heavy chapel doors creaking open behind them. They turned to see two palace guards entering, followed by the Duchess of Ravencrest. Prince Marcus, the Duchess said with false politeness, Queen Margaret requests your immediate presence in the throne room. I'm afraid I'm indisposed at the moment, Marcus replied coolly. I'm afraid it wasn't a request, the Duchess replied, and the guards moved closer. Alexander stepped forward. By what authority do you detain a prince of the realm? By the authority of the Queen, who has declared Lady Isabella Thornton under immediate protective custody, pending investigation of treasonous activities. Isabella felt the world spinning around her. Treasonous activities? What treasonous activities? Conspiring to usurp royal authority through the illegal invocation of defunct ceremonies, the Duchess replied smugly. Don't look so surprised, Lady Isabella. Did you really think you could plot against the crown without consequences? The guards moved to surround Isabella, but Alexander stepped protectively in front of her. You will not touch her, he said dangerously. Alexander, came a cold voice from the chapel entrance. Queen Margaret herself appeared, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Step away from that woman immediately. No, Alexander said simply. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Queen Margaret's eyes flashed with anger, but when she spoke, her voice was calm and measured. Very well. Then, you can both be arrested for treason. You can't arrest the heir to the throne, Marcus pointed out. Can't I? Queen Margaret smiled coldly. Actually, I can. For treason, for conspiracy, for any number of crimes. And a king in prison has a very difficult time ruling. Isabella realized that they had walked directly into a trap. Queen Margaret had known about their plans all along and had used that knowledge to corner them completely. There was no escape, no legal loophole, no ancient ceremony that could save them now. But as the guards moved closer and Isabella felt her dreams of freedom slipping away, she remembered the secret she carried. The one piece of information that might change everything. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the small chapel. "Before you arrest anyone, Your Majesty, there's something you need to know." Queen Margaret paused, her eyebrows raised in sardonic amusement. "Oh, and what would that be?" Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save them all or destroy them completely. "I'm carrying Alexander's child. Your grandchild." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the guards seemed to freeze in place as the full implications of Isabella's announcement sank in. Queen Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, calculation, and, finally, something that might have been fear. "You're lying," Lady Vivian said shrilly from behind the queen. "I'm not," Isabella replied steadily. "I can provide medical proof if necessary." Alexander moved to stand beside Isabella, taking her hand in his. "It's true, Mother. And I intend to marry her and legitimize our child." Queen Margaret looked between her son and Isabella, her political mind clearly racing through the implications. A royal bastard could be ignored or hidden away, but a royal bastard with a legitimate claim to the throne was a different matter entirely. "How far along?" she asked quietly. "Not far," Isabella admitted, "but far enough that the child is real and growing." The queen was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, she looked at Lady Vivian, whose face had gone white with shock and rage. "It seems," Queen Margaret said slowly, "that we have a more complicated situation than I anticipated." And, with those words, Isabella knew that the game had changed completely. The question was, had it changed in her favor, or had she just made herself an even bigger target? The chapel fell into a heavy silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Queen Margaret's calculating gaze moved between Isabella and Alexander, while Lady Vivian looked as though she had been slapped. The guards remained frozen in place, unsure whether to proceed with arrests in light of this shocking revelation. "Everyone out," Queen Margaret commanded suddenly. "Everyone except Alexander, Lady Isabella, and Lady Vivian." "Mother, I think we should," Marcus began, but the Queen's sharp look silenced him immediately. "Out. Now." Reluctantly, Marcus, Catherine, Earl Westfield, Lord Pemberton, and the Duchess of Ravencrest filed out of the chapel, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension and unspoken threats. Even Chaplain Benedict retreated to his vestry, clearly wanting no part in the royal family drama. Queen Margaret waited until the chapel doors closed before speaking again. Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Sit down, all of you." They arranged themselves on the front pew of the chapel, with Isabella between Alexander and Vivian. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on any of them, discussing the future of the kingdom in a place dedicated to truth and sacred vows. "Now," Queen Margaret said, standing before them like a judge about to pronounce sentence, "let's discuss what this pregnancy means for the future of Valdoria." "It means I'm marrying Isabella," Alexander said immediately. "Today, if possible." "Absolutely not," Vivian snapped, speaking for the first time since Isabella's announcement. "One night of passion doesn't erase years of political planning." "It wasn't one night," Alexander replied coldly. "Isabella and I have been in love for years. This child is proof of that love." Queen Margaret raised her hand for silence. "Alexander, your feelings are irrelevant. What matters is the succession and the stability of the kingdom." "How can you say that?" Isabella asked, finding her voice despite her fear. "This is your grandchild we're discussing." "A bastard grandchild," Queen Margaret corrected harshly. "Unless legitimized by marriage, this child has no claim to the throne." "Then, legitimize it," Alexander demanded. "Let me marry the woman I love. And destroy the alliance with the Blackwood family?" Queen Margaret shook her head. "Their shipping empire provides 60% of our kingdom's trade revenue. Without their support, Valdoria's economy would collapse within a decade." Vivian leaned forward, her gray eyes glittering with malice. "There is another solution, Your Majesty. Isabella could give birth to the child and then quietly disappear. The baby could be raised as an orphaned ward of the crown, and Alexander could still marry me as planned." Isabella felt sick at the suggestion. "You're talking about stealing my child." "I'm talking about practical solutions to complex problems," Vivian replied smoothly. "You would be well compensated for your contribution to the royal line. Alexander shot to his feet, his face red with fury. How dare you suggest such a thing? Isabella is not some broodmare to be discarded after serving her purpose. Isn't she? Vivian asked coolly. What else does she offer the kingdom? Her family has no money, no political connections, no strategic value whatsoever. She offers love, Alexander said simply. Something your political marriages will never provide. Queen Margaret had been watching this exchange with growing frustration. Enough, she said sharply. Alexander, sit down. We need to discuss this rationally. There's nothing rational about stealing a child from its mother, Alexander replied. But he sat down beside Isabella and took her hand. Actually, Queen Margaret said thoughtfully, Lady Vivian has raised an interesting point, though perhaps not the one she intended. She began to pace in front of them, her mind clearly working through various scenarios. The fact remains that Isabella is carrying a potential heir to the throne. This changes the entire political landscape. How so? Isabella asked nervously. Because, Queen Margaret explained, if this child is male, he would have a stronger claim to the throne than any children Alexander might have with another woman, even if those children were born legitimate. Vivian's face went pale. That's not possible. Oh, but it is, the Queen continued. Valdorian succession law prioritizes bloodline over legitimacy. A royal bastard born first has precedence over legitimate children born later, provided the bastard is acknowledged by the king. Alexander looked confused. I thought legitimacy was paramount. A common misconception, his mother replied. The law was written that way to prevent civil wars between half-siblings. If Alexander acknowledges this child as his own, that child becomes his primary heir, regardless of future marriages. Isabella felt a glimmer of hope. If her child would be the heir anyway, perhaps Queen Margaret would be forced to accept her place at court. But Vivian wasn't giving up so easily. There are ways around that problem, she said darkly. Children die in infancy all the time, especially bastards born to commoners. The threat was barely veiled, but it was clear enough to make Isabella's blood run cold. Alexander stood again, his hand moving instinctively to where his sword would normally hang. Are you threatening my child? He asked dangerously. I'm simply pointing out that infant mortality rates are quite high, especially among children born to mothers without proper medical care, Vivian replied with false innocence. Queen Margaret studied Vivian carefully. Lady Vivian, I think you're forgetting yourself. Threatening the life of a potential royal heir could be considered treason. I'm not threatening anyone, Your Majesty. I'm simply stating facts about the dangers faced by children born outside of marriage. Isabella realized that Vivian was essentially declaring war. If Isabella had this child, Vivian would find ways to eliminate both mother and baby. The realization filled her with a fierce protective instinct she had never felt before. Your Majesty, Isabella said, standing and facing the Queen directly. I want to make a proposition. Oh, Queen Margaret raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? Give me 1 year, Isabella said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Let me prove that I can be an asset to this kingdom, not just a burden. If, after 1 year, you still believe that my presence threatens the stability of the realm, I'll step aside voluntarily. And go where? Vivian asked skeptically. Wherever you choose, Isabella replied. But the child stays with Alexander. Alexander started to protest, but Isabella squeezed his hand, silencing him. She was gambling everything on this proposal, but it was the only way she could see to protect both her child and Alexander's position. Queen Margaret considered this for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing to do during this year that would prove your worth? Isabella took a deep breath. I propose to modernize the kingdom's charitable institutions. The orphanages, the hospitals for the poor, the schools in the outer provinces. I want to create a foundation that brings education and medical care to the people who need it most. That would require significant funding, Queen Margaret pointed out. Which I could help provide, Isabella continued. My father's debts are to the crown, correct? Instead of forcing him to pay with money he doesn't have, let him pay with labor. He's an excellent administrator. Put him in charge of organizing these charitable works, and you'll get more value than you ever would from seizing his lands. For the first time since entering the chapel, Queen Margaret looked genuinely interested. You're proposing to turn your family's greatest weakness into the kingdom's strength. Exactly. And, in the process, I'll prove that marrying for love doesn't have to mean sacrificing political advantage. Vivian laughed harshly. You think running a few orphanages makes you qualified to be queen? I think caring about the people you're meant to serve is the most important qualification for any ruler, Isabella replied steadily. Alexander smiled proudly at her words, but Queen Margaret's expression remained unreadable. And what about the immediate problem? The Queen asked. Lord Ashford is here, expecting to finalize his marriage arrangements with you. The Blackwood family is expecting Alexander's engagement to Lady Vivian to be announced tonight. How do you propose to handle those expectations? Isabella felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to think clearly. Tell Lord Ashford that I've been granted royal protection due to threats against my safety. As for tonight's engagement announcement, she turned to look at Vivian, an idea forming in her mind. What if there was a way for Lady Vivian to get everything she wants without destroying what Alexander and I have? I'm listening, Vivian said suspiciously. Prince Marcus is unmarried, Isabella pointed out. He's intelligent, handsome, and will inherit significant lands of his own. If you married him instead of Alexander, you would still be joining the royal family, and your children would still be in line for the throne. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Second in line, behind your bastard. Not necessarily, Isabella replied. Royal succession can be unpredictable, and Marcus genuinely cares for Lady Catherine, so you'd be freeing him to marry for love while still achieving your family's political goals. You're suggesting I settle for the spare instead of the heir? I'm suggesting that a guaranteed position as a royal duchess might be more valuable than a contested claim to be queen, Isabella said diplomatically. Queen Margaret watched this exchange with growing interest. It's not entirely without merit, she admitted. Marcus does need to marry well, and the Blackwood alliance could be preserved through his marriage instead of Alexander's. But what about the starlight tiara? Vivian demanded. I was promised the right to wear it at tonight's ceremony. And you still can, Isabella said, seeing a path forward. If you become engaged to Marcus tonight instead of Alexander, you can still wear the tiara. The legal implications would be different, but the symbolism would remain. Alexander looked at Isabella with amazement and love. Even under pressure, even facing threats to herself and her unborn child, she was trying to find a solution that would give everyone something they wanted. But Vivian wasn't convinced. And what guarantee do I have that this arrangement would actually benefit my family? You have my word, Queen Margaret said unexpectedly. If you agree to marry Marcus instead of Alexander, I will personally ensure that your family's trading privileges are expanded and that you receive a substantial dowry. Mother, Alexander asked, surprised by her apparent support for Isabella's plan. Queen Margaret smiled slightly. I'm not a monster, Alexander. I want what's best for the kingdom. If Isabella can prove that her presence strengthens rather than weakens our position, then I have no objection to your marriage. And if she can't prove it? Vivian asked. Then she honors her commitment to step aside, the Queen replied. But I suspect that won't be necessary. Isabella felt tears of relief beginning to form in her eyes. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was a chance. A real chance to build a life with Alexander and to raise their child in safety. But as they prepared to leave the chapel and put this new plan into motion, none of them noticed the small figure hiding behind the altar, listening to every word of their conversation. Lady Vivian's personal maid had been sent to find her mistress and had arrived just in time to hear the entire discussion. Now she slipped away quietly, her mind racing with the valuable information she had gathered. By evening, half the palace would know about Isabella's pregnancy and the new marriage arrangements. And some of those people would not be pleased with these developments. The game was far from over. The autumn feast that evening transformed the palace ballroom into a glittering spectacle of gold and crimson. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across the walls while nobles from across the kingdom gathered to witness what they believed would be the engagement announcement between Crown Prince Alexander and Lady Vivian Blackwood. Little did they know that the evening would unfold in ways none of them could have imagined. Isabella stood at her dressing table, her hands trembling as Elena helped her into an elegant emerald gown that had been hastily altered to accommodate her changing figure. Though her pregnancy barely showed, Isabella felt as though everyone would be able to see right through her. Miss, you look beautiful, Elena said gently, securing a delicate diamond necklace around Isabella's throat. Are you certain about tonight? I have to be, Isabella replied, meeting her own eyes in the mirror. There's no turning back now. A soft knock interrupted her preparations. Catherine entered, resplendent in a gown of deep purple silk that complemented her auburn hair perfectly. Her face was flushed with excitement and nervousness. Bella, are you ready for this? Catherine asked, taking her friend's hands. Because once we walk into that ballroom, everything changes. Isabella nodded, though her heart was racing. How is Marcus handling all of this? Better than expected, actually, Catherine smiled. He says he's relieved not to be living in Alexander's shadow anymore. And he seems genuinely interested in the idea of modernizing the kingdom through charitable works. And Lady Vivian? Catherine's expression grew more serious. She agreed to the arrangement, but I don't trust her. She spent the entire afternoon in meetings with her mother and various nobles. I think she's planning something. Before Isabella could respond, Alexander appeared in the doorway, magnificent in his formal military dress uniform. The deep blue fabric was adorned with gold braiding and medals, and a ceremonial sword hung at his side. But it was the expression in his dark eyes that took Isabella's breath away: love, determination, and fierce protectiveness. "You're stunning," he said softly, crossing the room to take her hands. "Are you ready to face the wolves?" "With you by my side, I can face anything," Isabella replied, and she meant it. They made their way through the palace corridors, joining the stream of nobles heading toward the ballroom. Isabella could feel eyes on her from every direction, and she caught fragments of whispered conversations as they passed. "Is it true about the pregnancy? I heard Queen Margaret is furious. The Blackwood family won't stand for this. Poor girl has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Alexander's jaw tightened at the whispers, but he kept his composure. "Ignore them," he murmured to Isabella. "They'll be singing a different tune soon enough." The ballroom doors opened, and they were announced by the royal herald, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Alexander, and Lady Isabella Thornton. The massive room fell silent as every head turned to watch them enter. Isabella felt the weight of hundreds of stares, some curious, some hostile, some simply entertained by the unfolding drama. The orchestra continued playing, but conversation ceased as they made their way toward the royal dais where Queen Margaret sat on her throne, resplendent in midnight blue velvet and the crown of Valdoria. Prince Marcus stood nearby, looking handsome and nervous in his formal attire. Lady Vivian was positioned next to him, wearing a stunning silver gown that seemed to shimmer with every movement. Her blonde hair was swept into an elaborate style that would perfectly frame the starlight tiara when the time came. But as Isabella looked around the room, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Lord Ashford stood near the refreshment tables, his cold eyes fixed on her with an expression of barely concealed rage. Beside him stood several other older nobles, all members of the conservative faction that opposed any changes to traditional royal customs. "He doesn't look happy," Alexander observed quietly, following her gaze. "I don't think any of them are," Isabella replied, noting the hostile expressions on various faces throughout the room. Queen Margaret rose from her throne, and the room fell into complete silence. "Lords and ladies of Valdoria," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the vast space. "Tonight we gather to witness a historic announcement that will shape the future of our kingdom." Isabella felt her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment that would determine whether she would finally be free to choose her own destiny or whether the carefully laid plans would crumble under political pressure. "As many of you know," the Queen continued, "we have been planning significant changes to the royal household. Tonight, I am pleased to announce not one, but 2 engagements." A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. This wasn't what they had been expecting. "First," Queen Margaret said, turning toward Marcus and Vivian, "I am delighted to announce the engagement of Prince Marcus to Lady Vivian Blackwood, daughter of the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom as nobles tried to process this unexpected development. Lady Vivian stepped forward and curtsied gracefully, but Isabella could see the tension in her posture. Marcus took Vivian's hand and bowed to his mother. "Your Majesty, I am honored to accept Lady Vivian as my bride." The crowd buzzed with excitement and confusion, but Queen Margaret raised her hand for silence. "Furthermore," she announced, "I am equally pleased to announce the engagement of Crown Prince Alexander to Lady Isabella Thornton." This time the gasps turned to outright exclamations of shock. Several nobles began talking at once, their voices rising in a cacophony of surprise and, in some cases, outrage. Alexander stepped forward, bringing Isabella with him. "Your Majesty," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the room, "I am honored to marry the woman I love and to make her my queen." Lord Ashford pushed through the crowd, his face red with fury. Your Majesty, this is unacceptable. Lady Isabella was promised to me. We have a binding agreement. Queen Margaret's expression grew cold. Lord Ashford, Lady Isabella was never promised to you. She was suggested as a potential bride, but no formal agreements were signed. But her father's debts, Lord Ashford began, will be resolved through other means, the Queen interrupted. Lady Isabella has proposed alternative arrangements that will benefit the kingdom far more than a loveless marriage. The crowd murmured with interest at this revelation, but Lord Ashford wasn't finished. This is about more than marriage contracts, he declared loudly. This is about a commoner seducing the heir to the throne and manipulating her way into the royal family. Isabella felt every eye in the room turn to her, and she knew this was the moment she had to speak for herself. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. Lord Ashford, I have never sought to manipulate anyone. I fell in love with Prince Alexander, and he with me. Our relationship is based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection, qualities that seem foreign to those who view marriage as nothing more than a business transaction. Several nobles nodded approvingly at her words, but Lord Ashford's expression grew even more hostile. And what of your condition? He demanded. Are you carrying the prince's bastard? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella felt Alexander tense beside her, ready to defend her honor, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. I am carrying Prince Alexander's child, she said clearly, her chin raised defiantly. A child that will be born legitimate, as the son or daughter of married parents. A child conceived in sin and shame, Lord Ashford spat. A child conceived in love, Alexander replied dangerously, his hand moving to his sword. And if you insult my future wife again, Lord Ashford, we will settle this matter with steel. Queen Margaret quickly intervened before the situation could escalate further. That will be quite enough, she declared. Chaplain Benedict, please proceed with the ceremony. The elderly chaplain stepped forward, carrying the starlight tiara on a velvet cushion. The ancient crown sparkled in the candlelight, its diamonds and sapphires casting rainbow reflections across the walls. Tonight, Chaplain Benedict announced, we witness the continuation of a tradition that stretches back centuries. The starlight tiara, worn by queens of Valdoria for over 500 years, will be presented to our future queens as a symbol of their acceptance into the royal family. He approached Lady Vivian first, who knelt gracefully as the tiara was placed upon her head. The crowd applauded politely, though many still seemed confused by the unexpected turn of events. But, as the chaplain turned toward Isabella, carrying a second, smaller tiara that had belonged to royal duchesses throughout history, Lord Ashford made his move. I protest this ceremony, he shouted, pushing forward through the crowd. This woman is unfit to wear any royal crown. Before anyone could react, he lunged toward Isabella, clearly intending to prevent her from receiving the tiara. But Alexander was faster. He stepped between them, his sword appearing in his hand with practiced speed. Stand down, Lord Ashford, Alexander commanded, his voice deadly serious. I will not stand by and watch this kingdom be corrupted by a fortune-hunting harlot. Lord Ashford raged, drawing his own weapon. The ballroom erupted in chaos as nobles scattered, some screaming, others pushing toward the exits. Palace guards rushed forward, but Alexander had already engaged Lord Ashford in combat. The two men fought with deadly serious intent, their swords clashing in the center of the ballroom. Lord Ashford was older but experienced, while Alexander was younger and faster. Isabella watched in horror, one hand protectively covering her stomach, as the man she loved fought for her honor and their future. Enough! Queen Margaret's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Guards, arrest Lord Ashford immediately. But, even as the guards moved to comply, Lord Ashford made one final, desperate lunge at Isabella. Alexander threw himself between them, taking Lord Ashford's blade in his shoulder as he drove his own sword through his opponent's heart. Lord Ashford collapsed to the marble floor, his blood spreading in a growing pool beneath him. Alexander swayed, but remained standing, his hand pressed to his wounded shoulder. Isabella rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. Alexander, are you all right? I'm fine, he assured her, though his face was pale from pain and blood loss. Are you hurt? Is the baby? We're both fine, Isabella said, helping to support him. But you need a physician immediately. As palace guards secured the scene and servants began cleaning up the aftermath of the fight, Queen Margaret approached them. Her expression was a mixture of concern for her son and grim satisfaction at the resolution of the conflict. "Well," she said dryly, "I suppose that settles any questions about Alexander's commitment to you, Lady Isabella." Despite everything that had happened, Isabella found herself smiling through her tears. "I suppose it does, Your Majesty." The rest of the ceremony proceeded with considerably less drama, though the atmosphere remained tense. Isabella received her tiara as planned, officially marking her acceptance into the royal family. Lady Vivian and Prince Marcus also completed their engagement ceremony, though Vivian's smile seemed forced throughout the proceedings. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Isabella found herself alone with Alexander in his private chambers while the royal physician tended to his wound. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly, watching as the doctor stitched his shoulder. "All of this chaos and bloodshed." Alexander reached for her hand with his uninjured arm. "Bella, you and our child are worth everything to me. I would fight 100 Lord Ashfords if necessary." "Let's hope that won't be necessary," Isabella replied, squeezing his hand gently. "It won't be," came Queen Margaret's voice from the doorway. She entered the room, carrying a thick folder of documents. "I've just finished reviewing the reports from tonight's unpleasantness. It seems Lord Ashford had been plotting with several other conservative nobles to force you into marriage and then use you as leverage against Alexander." "Leverage?" Isabella asked. "They planned to control you through fear and violence, then use that control to manipulate Alexander's decisions as king," the queen explained. "In a way, tonight's events may have prevented a much larger conflict down the road." She set the folder on the table beside the bed. "These are the legal documents recognizing your engagement and legitimizing your unborn child. I've also included a provisional charter for the charitable foundation you proposed. You'll have 1 year to prove yourself, as agreed." Isabella felt overwhelming gratitude and relief washing over her. "Your Majesty, thank you. I won't disappoint you." Queen Margaret studied her for a long moment. "I believe you won't. You've already shown more courage and intelligence than most nobles display in a lifetime." She paused, then added more softly, "And Alexander has never been happier than he is with you." As the queen prepared to leave, she turned back one final time. "Oh, and Lady Isabella, your father's debts have been officially forgiven. Consider it a wedding gift." After she left, Isabella and Alexander sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over the kingdom of Valdoria through the tall windows. The events of the past few days seemed almost surreal now. The threats, the political maneuvering, the dramatic confrontation that had nearly cost Alexander his life. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, noticing her distant expression. "I'm thinking about our child," Isabella replied, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "About the kind of kingdom we want to leave them. A better one than the one we inherited," Alexander said firmly. "One where love matters as much as politics, where the people's welfare comes before noble privilege." "It won't be easy," Isabella warned. "There will always be people like Lord Ashford who resist change." "Then we'll face them together," Alexander replied, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "You, me, and our child. A new generation of leaders who understand that true strength comes from caring for others, not from fear and intimidation." Isabella smiled, feeling for the first time in days that her future was truly her own to choose. "I love you, Alexander. And I love you, my brave, brilliant Isabella, my future queen." As they sat together watching the dawn break over their kingdom, Isabella thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a terrified young woman facing an unwanted marriage to a confident future queen ready to fight for the changes she believed in. It had been a transformation she could never have imagined. The road ahead would be challenging. There would be those who questioned her legitimacy, who resented her rise from minor nobility to future queen. There would be political obstacles, financial challenges, and the constant pressure of royal responsibility. But she would face it all with Alexander by her side, and their child as motivation to build something better. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the palace gardens, her pregnancy now visibly evident beneath her flowing blue dress. She was reviewing plans for the first of the new schools that would be built in the outer provinces, funded by the charitable foundation she had established. The project was already showing remarkable success, with literacy rates improving dramatically in the areas where the pilot programs had been implemented. "Your Majesty?" came Elena's voice from behind her. Since Isabella's engagement, her former maid had been promoted to lady-in-waiting, a position that had filled Elena with pride and fierce loyalty. "What is it, Elena?" Isabella asked, looking up from her papers. "Prince Marcus and Princess Vivian have arrived for the planning meeting," Elena reported. "They're waiting in the blue drawing room." Isabella smiled at the titles. Marcus and Vivian had married 3 months earlier in a lavish ceremony that had strengthened the Blackwood alliance while satisfying Vivian's ambitions. To everyone's surprise, including their own, they had developed genuine affection for each other based on their shared love of commerce and political strategy. "Tell them I'll be right there," Isabella said, gathering her papers. "And Elena? Have the kitchen prepare tea and those little cakes Prince Marcus likes." As Elena hurried away, Isabella took a moment to appreciate how much had changed. She was no longer the frightened young woman who had once clutched a pregnancy test in secret. She was the crown princess of Valdoria, carrying the heir to the throne and making real changes in her kingdom. Most importantly, she had chosen her own path and fought for her own happiness. And, in a few months, she would welcome a child into a world where love and duty could coexist, where tradition could be honored while still embracing progress. The future was uncertain, as it always was for those who dared to challenge the status quo. But Isabella faced it with confidence, knowing that she had proven herself capable of standing up to any challenge, fighting any battle, and protecting anything she held dear. As she walked back toward the palace, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly, Isabella smiled. She had won the right to write her own story, and she intended to make it a tale worth telling for generations to come. In the kingdom of Valdoria, where ancient traditions had once seemed unbreakable, a new chapter was beginning. And it would be written by a young woman who had refused to accept that her birth determined her destiny, who had fought for love in a world that valued only power, and who had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from wearing a crown, but from choosing when and how to claim it. The starlight tiara that now rested in Isabella's private chambers had been worn by queens for centuries. But none of them had earned it quite the way Isabella had, through courage, intelligence, love, and an unwavering determination to forge her own path. As the sun set over the palace gardens and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Isabella knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along: the freedom to choose her own destiny, the love of a good man, and the power to make a real difference in the world. It had been a long and dangerous journey from that first terrifying morning when she discovered her pregnancy to this moment of triumph and anticipation. But every challenge had been worth it for the life she now lived and the future she was helping to create. In the distance, the palace bells chimed the evening hour, calling the royal family to dinner. Isabella gathered her papers and headed inside, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that she would face it as herself, chosen, loved, and free.